The Perth property market has a critical problem. In this episode, we'll go through what that problem is, how that affects both owner-occupiers, people who live in Perth, and also investors from Perth and the East Coast, and what will happen to the property market in Perth in terms of price in 2023. Based on data, I'll take you through 5 or 6 charts looking at inventory levels, population, demand forecasts, and where prices are likely to end up. If you're interested, carry on watching. My name's PK and I help people build passive income through property investing using data, using the Property Investment Accelerator without needing a $15,000 buyer's agent every single time. In this channel, we talk about property, we talk about the economy, and we talk about financial happiness. Give it a like, let's go. So this first chart is really, really important. This is all from Matusik, so I've, credit to him for producing this. What I want to share with you is the number of months left for oversupply of property in the market across different cities, and then we'll deep dive on Perth. Okay, stick with me. Effectively, the way you get to understand where property prices rise or not is simply demand and supply. And what Matusik has done here is a high-level proxy for supply and demand. And the conclusion here is supply left in months. So if demand continues the way it is, all right, all including interest rate changes and all that good stuff, borrowing capacity changes, and also the number of dwellings which have been approved end up getting off the ground, so a good forecast, an optimistic forecast, I would say, of the supply side. How many months left before there's just not enough supply in the market and prices go up? Okay, so in Sydney and Melbourne, you can see that there's a lot of supply left. Okay, prices aren't going north anytime soon. In Brisbane, 3 months, Adelaide, 9 months. And I'll come back and qualify some of these statements in a second. Perth, 2 months. Hobart, 2 months. Now, that doesn't mean you should just go off and buy in Hobart right now. I'll qualify them as I go through the video. Darwin, nothing's probably the hottest property market in pockets right now. And Canberra, a lot. Let's start off with a deep dive of Sydney. So this is the axis here around this 2 mark. Oversupply of new dwellings is anything above, and undersupply is anything below. So what that means is that underlying demand being 1 new dwelling per 2 to 2.1 new residents. Now this includes, for all of these cities, it includes the hundreds of thousands of new migrants from overseas coming into Australia. So it's a true reflection of, on the demand side, population forecast, and it's a true reflection, a very optimistic one, of supply side. It actually assumes every building approval, everything that council says, yes, you can build, will be built. Now, we know that that's probably not going to happen because of construction costs. We're the builders, we're the tradespeople, right? So I think this is a best case scenario. And Sydney, Melbourne, there is a lot of oversupply of houses right now. Going to Brisbane, there was an oversupply, but you see it's coming underneath this axis now. So it's starting to become in an environment where there's undersupply. Now, that doesn't mean prices are just going to go up for Brisbane just yet. There's other factors to consider, like affordability. Interest rates have gone up, so people can't borrow as much. Adelaide still has an oversupply. I told you I'd qualify it. Now, yes, Adelaide has an oversupply of dwellings, but as always, there's markets within markets. And so on the far north of Adelaide, around Elizabeth and places like that, there's like just far too many buildings being approved. Like Anglevale, more than 1,000 new houses will be built there over the next few years. So that's what weighs in on this overall Adelaide story. But south side or inner north of Adelaide, there's hardly anything. And if we just looked at the south or inner north for Adelaide, this yellow line would be well in the undersupply of dwellings category. Now, Perth, let's do a deep dive. That's what this video is about, right? Okay, so as we saw through the decade, mining went bust, all right? 2013, 14, 15, everyone who owned a home, they, maybe sold it or they moved back to the East Coast because they didn't need their FIFO jobs anymore. So there was just so many houses on the market. And that is why property in Perth went down. You can see, this demand supply dynamic, it predicts property prices. So property prices tanked in Perth. There's no doubt about it. But then what you had is even before COVID, all the way from 2017, 18, 19, there was an undersupply of new dwellings in Perth. And so that's why you found that property prices stabilized and they started to gain more health. Now, that wasn't enough for sentiment to change like a pendulum and say, oh, look, let's start investing there. But then COVID happened, okay? And now in COVID, a lot of new properties got built because of a home builder and all the grants and everything. But those have been largely exhausted. Now, yes, there is still a lot of building approvals in Perth, but this is the supply-demand story, and the amount of immigration, both interstate, regional, and international immigration into Perth suggests that even with the big pipeline of new dwellings on the far south, far north of Perth, there's still an undersupply. And you can see it's trending downwards. Another great thing about Perth is got one of the highest incomes, I think the second highest income, or even the first out of any capital city in Australia. Property prices are very affordable. Like, it's hard to see an environment or a climate where in 2 years you can buy anything under $500,000 in any capital city in Australia. You can do that right now only in Perth, okay? That's not going to exist regardless of interest rates, because property prices are dictated by supply and demand. Right here, we see the perfect storm of high affordability, high incomes, chronic shortage in both rental and owner-occupier houses that is tending us to suggest that property prices will continue booming in Perth. Now, not everywhere. You can't just put a blindfold on like you could in the last year or two across Australia, right? In particular pockets, but there's so much money to be made right now. If you asked me, PK, with interest rates and the R word, recession, is this a good time to buy property? I would say, nah, not really, if you're buying with a blindfold. But if you know where to buy in places like Perth, pockets of regional Victoria, regional New South Wales, and even Queensland, if you know where, then you're still going to get that 10%, 20% capital growth over the next 2 years, because there are areas where the supply-demand dynamic is super skewed towards price increases. Hobart is a similar story. So you might be like, oh, heck, how come you're not saying to buy in Hobart right now, PK? The reason is affordability is just not there. No one can afford a property in Hobart anymore. Like, the locals can't afford it. Even those Melbourneites, they're starting to see Hobart property prices becoming super, super expensive. Like, this is the first time in history where Adelaide has been more expensive than Perth. Okay, like, that's why I'm so bullish on Perth. That's never happened before. And I remember doing a video a year ago, or a year and a half ago, on how, the Gold Coast property prices track Sydney, and there had never been a bigger difference in property prices between Sydney and the Gold Coast. And after that, I did that video, Gold Coast went up like almost 40-50%. Sydney didn't, by the way, in that time period. That is what's happening with Perth and Adelaide right now. It's like a pendulum. Now all those people that would have invested in Adelaide are going to go to Perth because of affordability, and Perth property is going to go up. Now, the next one is Darwin. You can see a similar story. I'm very bullish on Darwin. I just don't like the long-term projections of Darwin, highly exposed to the LNG sector, very fickle labor force. So it's a short-term play, not a long-term play. We want to buy property for the long term, right? Passive income. And Canberra, you can see here, prices are likely to go down for quite a while yet. So I know that the doomsdayers amongst you will say, but PK, interest rates are going to continue to go up. Property's already declining. Recessions are happening globally. The recession will come in Australia. By the way, if you want me to do a video on whether there will or will not be a recession in Australia next year using data, leave a yes below. I'll do that if you leave a yes below. But what I'm here to tell you is that Australian property is nothing like global property. For example, look at this chart. Exploding inventory higher supply is what causes property markets to crash. Right now, property prices in Australia come down 6%. That's not a crash, okay? Yes, they'll come down by probably another 4 or 5%. That's still not a crash. That's just 10% after a gain of more than 30%. Okay, what does cause property prices to crash is when supply goes through the roof, so much for sale, so many distressed sales, demand is low. That is what's happening in some parts of the US. Exploding inventory like Phoenix, Colorado Springs, Austin. Property listings are going through the roof, like on a year-on-year basis, more than 177% increase in the number of listings or supply in Phoenix. That is a recipe for disaster. But even in the US, as you can see right here, there are markets within markets. Okay, there are markets within markets. A lot of the increased supply is these yellow states here on the west coast and down south, but here on the northeast in the blue, that's where inventory levels have gone down, supply has gone down. So even, in like the most basket case economy right now, arguably the US, there's markets within markets. Property prices in some areas are falling, some areas continue to go up. What to speak of Australia, where listings are actually down almost everywhere in Australia. That is what's keeping a floor under property prices, and we're not going to have an instance of mass distress sales, foreclosures, defaults. I've got data to back that up as well. I'll do that in a future video. But to round it off, I gave you an insight into why property prices in Perth will continue to go up. On aggregate, maybe not because of far north, far south, but in pockets there's chronic undersupply, and I think there's capital gains of 10 to 20% over the next year or two. Go for the data, guys. Forget what the media is saying. Forget what I'm saying. I'm just another spruiker, right? Quote unquote. The data is suggesting that the right time to buy property is now, as long as you know where and you know how. Level up your knowledge, because you can still make so much. I shouldn't even say you can always make money in property as long as you know the knowledge of how to do that. I'll leave links below to a Facebook group with 25,000 amazing community members, and my podcast, completely free, right? Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. You can level up and take your knowledge to the next level, because as I always say, the most important real estate is the 6 inches between your two ears. Invest in that, and everything else will take care of itself. My name's PK. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, give it a like. I'll see you next time. Catch you later. Bye.